My name is Manfred Helber. I'm Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in the category Cloud and Data Center. And I will not only explain you which hybrid capabilities we have in Azure Stack HCI together with Windows Admin Center, I also will show you in detail what hybrid functionality is in there in a live demo. So let's first have a look at a few slides. In the Windows Admin Center, we have a dedicated section for Azure Benefits. Because as you have learned in previous modules, Azure Stack HCI is Azure on-premises. With Azure Stack HCI, we have an operating system we install on our Azure Stack HCI certified hardware in our data centers to enable Azure capabilities in our own data center. To enable this, the Azure Stack HCI cluster is connected to Azure. This onboarding usually is finished after the deployment of the cluster. In one of the previous modules, I had a live demo about this where I showcased how to register Azure Stack HCI with Azure and configure Azure Arc. And when we have registered our cluster to Microsoft Azure, our Azure Stack HCI cluster to Microsoft Azure, we are able to unlock the Azure Benefits to bring Azure functionality to our on-premises. These are benefits like, for example, the Windows Server 2022 Data Center Azure Edition with an extended feature set. And these are also the extended security updates for Windows Server operating systems. This is very interesting because actually we have still a lot of Windows Server systems based on Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2. And as you might know, the end of support date for Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2 was in January 2020. If you are qualified to receive extended security updates, you can still have support for Windows Server 2008, 2008 R2, and also for SQL Server. How to get extended security updates? You can pay for these extended security updates if you have an eligible volume license agreement. You will get the extended security updates when you migrate your workload to Azure. And because Azure Stack HCI is Azure on-premises, you will also receive the extended security updates for your workload on Azure Stack HCI. So let's have a look at the specific Azure settings provided in the Windows Admin Center exclusively for Azure Stack HCI. What we can see here is an Windows Admin Center installation where we are connected to an Azure Stack HCI cluster. And as we can see here, this cluster is successfully connected to Microsoft Azure. We finished this connectivity in our module where we were talking about registering the Azure Stack HCI cluster with Azure and configuring Azure Arc. When we now choose the settings at the end of the tools list, in the settings, we have this dedicated Azure Stack HCI section. This is only available when we are connected to an Azure Stack HCI cluster. Here we can check again the Azure Stack HCI registration status with more details. I can see, okay, it's registered, Azure Arc is enabled, my subscription ID, I can connect to the Azure resource, I could unregister if necessary. I can see I'm connected and I can see when the last connection to Azure happened, and I can choose to synchronize manually if this is necessary here in this configuration. Now let's go to the Azure Benefits. With the Azure Benefits, I can unlock this exclusive Azure features for Azure Stack HCI. This means I mentioned in this module and also in the module about the Azure Stack HCI basics that Azure provides us Azure Stack HCI provides us Azure functionality on premises. But till now, Azure Stack HCI is only ready to provide these features. Actually, my Azure Stack HCI cluster is not enabled for this Azure Benefits. This has been done here in clicking on Turn On. You can see to use additional Azure exclusive features, including with Azure Stack HCI, turn on Azure Benefits on your cluster. Learn more. It's a preview feature. It's here like a present box because we have additional features. Actually, the additional features are without any additional costs if we are licensed correctly for Azure Stack HCI. We have activated our Azure Stack HCI. So let's activate the Azure Benefits. The first question is, if I want to turn on Azure Benefits for the whole cluster, for all virtual machines, if I want to activate Azure Benefits later for new virtual machines, I have to do this manually. This is the reason why I will uncheck this box. I will also show you how to enable the Azure Benefits for selected virtual machines. Let's turn on the Azure Benefits for this cluster. It takes a while. Here in the notification section, we can see the Azure Benefits will be enabled, and we will see here the workflow of turning on Azure Benefits on this Azure Stack HCI cluster here. As you can see in the message on the screen, turning on the Azure Benefits could take a few minutes. And what we have seen in one of our previous modules, the Azure Benefits are only available if my cluster is updated to the latest version with the latest updates. This can be done via Update Management for the Azure Stack HCI cluster in the Windows Admin Center. I installed updates in one of the previous videos in one of the previous modules. So here I can see turn on Azure Benefits is already successfully finished. Here you have to know that the Windows Admin Center usually provides here the information when the step has finished regarding providing the information what to do. In the details area, usually I need some refresh to see the result. So what can I see here? Azure Benefits are turned on for the cluster. Actually, we have no virtual machine with activated Azure Benefits. So the cluster is capable to use to provide the Azure Benefits, but it's not activated for any VM. When I switch to the cluster level, I can see, okay, the cluster has activated the Azure Benefits. I have an expiration date. This is important. This is 30 days from today, because I mentioned several times already in previous modules that I need an Azure connectivity not 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. It's not necessary to be permanently connected to Azure. You have a lot of advantages if you are permanently connected. Let's imagine you are using Azure Monitor, we will see in a later module, or you want to use Azure Virtual Desktop. But when we are only running virtual machine workload on our cluster, and when we want to provide the billing via the Azure subscription, it's okay to be connected to Azure minimum once every 30 days. Usually we will have a connectivity where we maybe have sometimes a shorter outage. And this will not have any impact on your workload. But the Azure Benefits, they are only available if I'm connected to Azure minimum every 30 days. You have to be connected to Azure for the subscription and billing information. And you need the connectivity to Azure minimum once every 30 days to be able to create new virtual machines. So Azure Stack HCI is not usable in a complete disconnected scenario, But if you want to have this powerful hybrid benefits, you usually will not have a disconnected scenario, but maybe you will wonder what will happen if I lose connectivity because of an outage of the internet connection. Regarding these benefits, nothing happens. Because if my connectivity is back tomorrow, then it will sync automatically with Azure. I can also sync manually with Azure, and then the expiration date will be moved in the future, again 30 days from now. So this is the information regarding the cluster. Let's switch to the virtual machines. I can take one of these virtual machines, or both, or all virtual machines, and turn on the Azure Benefits for this virtual machine. So I can select the machine where I want to activate the Azure Benefits. Actually, I don't have additional costs for this Azure Benefits here if I have a suitable license on my Azure Stack HCI host. As we learned in the licensing module about Azure Stack HCI, we don't have any virtual usage rights included in Azure Stack HCI. But we can choose for activate Windows Server VMs via an Azure subscription. This is in preview actually. If we select activate Windows Server VMs setup and we want to purchase the Windows Server subscription license, we go to next. Then we will have a billing via the Azure subscription. Based on my course, the costs will be physical course per physical host multiplied with the per core costs. Actually, we don't know this per core costs because this is in preview, so you will not be charged for this if you try out this feature, if you test this functionality. If you choose for Windows Server subscription here, you can unlock the Azure Benefits and you have everything included. We have seen I have two virtual machines. If I have the Windows Server subscription for this cluster with the two virtual machines, I have everything included. I need to use the Azure Benefits here. If I decide for setting up automatic virtual machine activation, that's important to know. Then it's important to know to activate virtual machines based on a Windows Server license key. I will enter here. I will hear the key from host 1, and here I will add the key from host 2. It's the key from host 2. It adds the dashes here because this is the format of the license key. I will remove the dashes to make clear what it is. It says this is not a correct format because it has to be 4 digits and then 5 digits, minus 5 digits, and so on. You know these keys to activate Windows Server. And you can use the OEM license keys you bought from your server vendor, from your OEM for your Azure Stack HCI nodes. It's not an Azure Stack HCI key. It's the Windows Server 2020, 2022 data center license key from the base edition, from the OEM base edition, to have the virtual usage rights for unlimited virtual machines in this cluster. We have to license all the nodes with data center, or we have to choose for the Azure subscription. Now it's important, this license key from an OEM license, this is what I would recommend to you because the OEM license has all the functionality in there. We don't have any technical limitations and it's a very price optimized way to license Windows Server. I would use the OEM license, or you also can use a volume license here, volume licensing for the server, or the Azure subscription we have seen before. In the Azure subscription, we have everything included we need for the Azure Benefits. If you use the OEM licensing option here or the volume licensing option, it's important to have the software assurance if we, for example, want to use in the Azure Benefits the Windows Server 2022 Data Center Azure Edition. So for this virtual machine here, I have to ensure that I have the usage rights for the Azure Benefits. So the technical process was successful here, but we don't have a license check today. So you have to ensure it's a licensing on a trust basis. And option 1 is to have the Windows Server subscription via Azure. This is in preview today. The other option is to decide for the traditional licensing way. Then you have to add a software assurance to ensure that you have a software assurance to be allowed to use these hybrid benefits like the Data Center Azure Edition. And for the software assurance, you have to keep in mind that you have to renew the software assurance typically every 2 years. I think this is easy to understand, and this is the reason why we can enable the Azure Benefits on a per VM basis, and we can disable this on a per VM basis. So we cannot provide licenses for dedicated virtual machines in the traditional licensing way, but we have learned in the licensing module, you must not always license data center. In a smaller scenario, it's also possible to license with stacked standard editions. And in this scenario, maybe we don't want to activate this functionality for every VM. So Azure Benefits, we have seen the activation of the virtual machines. In several previous modules, we have also seen in the hybrid capabilities that we can directly jump to the Azure resource in the Azure portal because we have a hybrid functionality in both directions. We have hybrid capabilities where we add Azure services on premises. We have hybrid capabilities where we extend on premises features with additional functionality. And we have hybrid capabilities in using management functionally in the portal, like for example, gathering information about the server, configuring the update management, for example, for this dedicated machine here. And so we can also connect from the Azure portal to our on-premises resources, and we can add Azure features to our on-premises environment. In a later module, we will see how to activate Azure Monitor. This is also one of these hybrid services, and also Azure Kubernetes Services is one of these hybrid services, but we will see this later in an additional module. What's interesting, and I will come back to the presentation and then continue the live demo, when we go to the host level, then we have a dedicated hybrid center for additional hybrid features. This hybrid center we can see here on the screenshot, and we will see in a few minutes in the live demo, is also available for Windows Server. So the Azure Hybrid Benefits we have seen in the first live demo is exclusive to Azure Stack HCI. This hybrid center is available for the Azure Stack HCI hosts, but it would be also available if our target systems are Windows Server 2022, or Windows Server 2019. So let's have a look at this Azure Hybrid Center, because the Azure Hybrid Center is already very powerful today, and the Azure Hybrid Center will be extended in the future with additional features. We have different ways how to access the Azure Hybrid Center. One possible way is to move from the Windows Admin Center, from the view of the cluster, to the servers. We can select the servers here in the list. And for the servers, we can jump to the inventory. And in the inventory, we can select for one of these servers and we can choose the Manage option. Now we are switching to the node directly, the Azure Stack HCI node 01. For this Azure Stack HCI node 01, we can select for the Azure Hybrid Center. When the Azure Hybrid Center is loaded completely, we will see, oh, there are already hybrid features activated. Because remember, one of the previous modules where I explained to you how to register Azure Stack HCI in Microsoft Azure and how to configure Azure Arc. This was part of the onboarding process of our Azure Stack HCI cluster. So Azure Arc is already set up here. It's a recommendation to set up every server you enable for the Azure Hybrid Services for Azure Arc. Because Azure Arc enables powerful, rich functionality for future management via the Azure portal. This is very, very interesting when you want to maybe activate Azure Monitor in a later point of time for all your servers or for a selection of your servers. If you want to configure policies for your servers or for a selection of your servers. If you want to provide update policies and so on. So Azure Arc is a very, very powerful feature. It will get more powerful in the future, and Azure Arc is automatically activated on each cluster node on Azure Stack HCI clusters, starting with version 21H2, where we have finished the Azure registration. Now we can see the powerful additional information here or hybrid services. It's Azure Backup. We will configure Azure Backup in a dedicated module later in this video series. We can use, it's clear, I think, Azure Backup. Azure Backup is a host-based backup for our server nodes. So with Azure Backup, we could back up our Azure Stack HCI nodes. We could back up our virtual machines. The backup is stored in an offsite location in an Azure Backup vault, and it can be restored from Azure. Azure Site Recovery is even more powerful because Azure Site Recovery allows us to switch with our workload to Microsoft Azure if we have an outage or failure on premises. With the Azure File Sync, we can synchronize file content to Azure to provide it from there or to distribute it to other locations. With the Azure Network Adapter, we can configure point-to-site VPN connections from on-premises to Azure, because a typical question is how to access the content I have in Azure. The Azure Virtual Network Adapter can support you there. Azure Monitor, we will configure in a future module. With Azure Monitor, I can have an Azure-based monitoring of my server nodes. And this means for Azure Stack HCI, if I have a failure on a node, if I have an overload in my cluster, if I'm running out of resources, if a disk fails, I will have the information in the Azure portal. And for sure, I can be notified for this. I have the Azure Update Management here. I mentioned the update policies. The Azure Security Center, the great thing is here, if you think about Azure Security Center, for example, you don't have any additional costs if you register your hosts, your virtual machines in Azure Security Center, but you are able to enable extended security features via the Azure portal. The extended network allows you to use on-premises subnets in Azure. This is especially helpful if you migrate workload to Azure, or if you are using Azure Site Recovery and you want to keep your IP subnetting in the situation of a failure. So this is the hybrid center, and the hybrid center will be expanded in the next versions of Windows Server, in the next versions of Windows Admin Center, in the next versions of Azure Stack HCI. When I select Installed Services, I will see the already enabled services. Here I can see the Azure Arc. I can directly jump to Azure Arc for servers. I can view this server in Azure, and I can open the documentation for Azure Arc. What's important to understand, with Windows Admin Center, I unlock these features, I unlock these capabilities. So if I would configure Azure Monitor here, I would configure the Azure Monitor for this on-premises server, this one here, via the Windows Admin Center. Remember, Windows Admin Center runs on a different host. Let's check this in the host list. My Windows Admin Center is running on this machine here. This is my gateway. This is my Windows Admin Center machine. I'm actually configuring the host Azure Stack, I'm configuring this host here, the Azure Stack HCI 01 server host of this Azure Stack HCI cluster here. This means Windows Admin Center is the tool, the target is the server, and to ensure that this hybrid functionality works, even if Windows Admin Center is not available, we will see agents that are installed, and I can see the first agent of the Azure Machine agent, the Azure Connected Machine agent that was automatically provided on the nodes when I enabled the Azure Arc integration. When we will walk through the enablement of Azure Monitor, Azure Backup, and Azure Site Recovery in the next modules, we will see that there will be additional agents published to the server nodes, not because Windows Admin Center needs them, but the hybrid features will need them. So powerful hybrid features here in the Windows Admin Center, and as we have seen, several exclusive features in Azure Stack HCI because of the hybrid capabilities we can enable exclusively via the Azure Benefits in the Azure Stack HCI cluster. And you always should keep this in mind because this Azure Benefits will be expanded in the future. This is a promise Microsoft gave to us that we have the first Azure Benefits with the extended security updates, with the Data Center Azure Edition, with enhanced feature set like hot patching, like SMB over quick. We will see capabilities like extended security updates also for Windows Server 2012, 2012 R2, for SQL Server 2012, 2012 R2, and so on. So this is a really great advantage of Azure Stack HCI, and it's easy to configure it via Windows Admin Center. If you prefer to use PowerShell, you can configure all these options also via Windows PowerShell.